So, ha, got
All
it.
right, go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and you should now see the first title slide, Epilogue to a Crisis. I'm delighted to be here. This is my contact details. It shows up on the next slide as well. And there's always a bit of a lag here about things connecting. So what is an epilogue? An epilogue is the part of the story that's added to the end. It's part of the story that is summary. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame this presentation as though it were a story with characters and plot lines. And the plot goes something like this. In the United States, there were poorhouses. We all know what a poorhouse is. We've seen Dickens and that sort of thing. Those poorhouses became nursing homes. The nursing homes got old and we stopped building new ones. The why of this, I understand, even though it makes no sense. Organized irresponsibility. Nobody wanted to work there. And then the authorities, the governments said, hire more people. That too doesn't make very much sense. More organized irresponsibility. We paid the people who work in these places poorly, and then we told them to do more, which of course makes all the sense in the world. And then we have COVID-19. So there was a very interesting article in the New Yorker magazine that's featured here, and you don't have to write any of this stuff down in the presentation that I'll send to Bob for sharing with all of you. There's a list of references. A very good article in New Yorker about how the American nursing home, and unfortunately we have to include a lot of assisted living and independent living centers, how they're a design disaster. So here's the plot disruption. These are infections in nursing centers and congregate care centers in the United States over time. And the really good news here is that the professionals in these centers were able to control these infections. And here's, of course, the plot line of deaths, which should have been an enormous wake-up call to the aggregated political establishment. And that's why this program is called Epilogue. We will see whether or not indeed it is. So as I said here, post-conclusion, afterward, coda, postlude, etc. A lot of different synonyms. But what we really had absolutely is a crisis. This pandemic represents a crisis to the congregate long-term care sector in the United States, such as never been seen before, and probably will never be seen again. And what it really is on a tactical level is it's damage to the brand, to the local brand, but it's also damage to the strategic position of these products in our societies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that particular plot line as we go along. So the story continues. We hope the storyline continues. There are durable segments to the markets for congregate care. Debbie was talking about that in the introduction, in her introductory remarks. There's a durable segment for respite. There's a durable segment for memory care. In the skilled nursing environment, it's sad, but it's correct way to say it is many skilled nursing centers are the end of the road destination for many who have no choice. They're poor, they're very sick, they have neurological, neuromuscular disorders, they have memory loss, Alzheimer's, or cognitive impairment that's not dementia. And in assisted living, residential care homes, and home care, there are indeed durable segments. And if those of you who are involved in home care, Bob and others, and those of you who are involved in community-based services, You are the golden-haired darlings of the moment. Every bit of attention and political energy seems to be directed to anything with the word home in it. We're even taken to calling hospital in home or hospital at home. Well, in 1991, as a national vice president for what was then called Kimberly Quality Care, the largest home care company in the United States, we had hospital at home. So this is really old wine and new skins as far as this old cynic is concerned. So who are the characters in this story for the long-term care sectors? Well, the markets are the who. They are the people that are being served. The physical structures are the bones of it. The programs, the designed programs are the neurological or the muscular system. The technology and information could be the wiring in the system. The workforce is the blood, the heartbeat of the system, the means of production. The culture is the background attitudes and operating mindset. And the outcomes are the, what does this person do? What's the outcome? So these are the characters in this storyline to which we're now looking at the epilogue. Finally is economics. Many people talking about what's going on in long-term care focus first on the economics. I think that's a huge mistake. It does such disservice to what we're attempting to do. But unfortunately, the way the segment has been, the way the sector has been built, it's been built around silos. It's been built around these channels for payment, which are the way as well regulation is built. So assisted living is regulated at a profoundly different level in a very different way than is skilled nursing. Independent living and home health care organized in very different ways. Heck, there are even two segments called home care, both called home care, which are funded out of completely different sources of money. So the economics of the sector follow the regulatory model, and that's unfortunate, but a fact of life that we have to deal with. So one could consider economics as being a lingering legacy of the overall character development. So where are we in these markets in this epilogue to a crisis? In congregate housing and skilled nursing, well, this is where we are. As we can see from this chart, from some of the best available data in the sectors, the occupancy and utilization for virtually every property type has fallen off a cliff. Now, there are many of you who tell me that your properties are filled, that you only have a few vacancies. Congratulations. I expect that you are the exceptions, either that or you're putting the guild on the, you're putting lipstick on a you know what. So, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to do that. But this is what COVID has done to our sector. It's absolutely crushed it. Now, this wasn't without some advanced notice, some advanced initiatives. There are things going on in the market even before COVID. Pre-pandemic, utilization of skilled nursing had fallen dramatically from 1995 in the 65 plus age cohort. Utilization had been 5.21%, and it slid all the way down to 2.35%. It's currently, according to our best estimates, just a tick over 2%. What that means is that fewer people in these age cohorts are utilizing this form of congregate care. The reason, one of the key reasons for this is demographics. Demographics is destiny. It's a little like gravity. You can try to escape it. You can try to jump, or you can be, if you're as rich as Jeff Bezos or as rich as Elon Musk, you can take a rocket. But you still have to exert an awful lot of energy to get past gravity, and we simply can't do it. Demographics is gravity for us, And the fact is that we are now recipients of what is referred to as the demographic dip or the birth dearth. From the period of 1925 to 1945 is the lowest rate of live births on record in the United States. And you can see it here from this graph. The people who utilize long-term care are generally 85 years of age and older. If you have a goal of recruiting consumers, markets who are 75 plus, which is the usual marketing spin, that's great. But the fact of the matter is that the average age of relocation to an assisted living residence in the United States is 86.4. The average age of relocation to a skilled nursing center in the United States is well over 87. It's been going up. And the average age of relocation to an independent living community in the United States, although this data is harder to scrape together, it's equally high. It's about 82. So we have to accept that the people who were born in 1935 to 1937 are currently our consumer. And where is 1935 or 1937? It's right at the dip. It's right at the sulcus, the nadir, the lowest point on this live birth curve. So those are the people that we are now recruiting or who are looking at our properties, trying to decide whether or not they should consider relocating to those properties. So the physical bones, the physical structure of the skilled nursing centers in the United States and the assisted living as well as independent living have some characteristics about them. First of all, so I refer to property, plant, and equipment, which is an accounting term. It was the original PPE before personal protective equipment came on the scene. Most nursing homes in the United States were built between 1960 and 1975. They were modeled on hospitals. Most of them were built with funds from what was referred to as the Hill-Burton Act. It is the Hill-Burton Act. And they were modeled on hospitals. They were cookie cutter, 111 beds. The average nursing home in the United States is 111 beds. Assisted living was built on a model. Again, I hate to say it, sports fans, but it's a cookie cutter. I've been in thousands of these places around the United States, and so many of them look frighteningly the same. You can put different drapes in, you can put different chandeliers in, but they really look the same because they were conceived, they were created around the same period of time by similarly influenced designers and architects. And they were built around the premise of efficiency of staff, efficiency of common space, efficiency of centralized services. Since that period, since the 1990s, since the early 1990s, and I hate to remind you all, but that's 30 plus years ago, there's been little or no reinvestment. There's been very little no reinvestment in skilled nursing to speak of, and a little bit in assisted living. There's been new product added in assisted living, but there has been very little fundamental change in the legacy properties. Capitalization in the sector, and this is again a strategic topic, capitalization in the sector has been extractive. Money hasn't been added back to the sector. Money has been taken out of the sector. And the federal government withdrew financial support. The federal government, that is to say Medicare and other federal programs, offered de minimis support for congregate programs of any kind, assisted living, independent living, and or skilled nursing. The result, yuck. As I like to say, would you like to stay in a Hilton or a Marriott that hadn't been renovated in 40 or 50 years? I don't think so. And that's what we have. That's what the inventory is like. So for structures, what do we need? We need a much wider variety. Now, as I sit here, I'm the leading edge of the baby boom. People talk about the baby boom. And I'd like to say that I'm not ready for anything like a congregate care center. But I know that my cohort want variety. They want far greater variety than the legacy inventory or supply of congregate care centers has to offer. We need large places like what we've got now, but I believe that college dormitories are going to step in and provide attractive common space options, because I do believe that there's going to be quite a lot of colleges closing, and the race, the student dorm arms race that was conducted in the 2000s is going to provide us with an inventory of unused, empty student dorms that are going to provide a nice backdrop, a nice canvas on which to create some pretty interesting seniors housing programs. We need medium size, like the current assisted livings. The average size of an assisted living in the United States is just a tick over 70 units. I would call that a medium-sized property. We need those, but we also need small centers. I'm doing a program in November, a webinar in November, and I invite all of you, any of you, to participate. It's free, with Susan Ryan of the Greenhouse Project, talking about small options, the small house model, how to make that work. There are lots of people making it work. How can we make it work in an organized and somewhat more structured way? And I like to think of the Golden Girls as being a good example of that. The current inventory of supply benchmarks quant, not quality. In other words, it's more important currently in the development of properties, what can be extracted rather than the quality of life for the residents there. I know you all are focused on quality of life, but I'm talking at a strategic level. The investors, the private equity funds, the venture capitalists, the banks, they want their money back. They want to know when their exit is and how it's going to occur. And real estate, the dirt under your buildings, is actually what undergirds the sector. And I usually go off here in a conversation about the difference between equity and debt financing. I'm going to skip that for this presentation. The other thing I want to talk about is IT, because that is part of the structure in our narrative, in our story, that's been so incredibly head-bangingly absent in the congregate long-term care sector. The grocery store down the road from your assisted living residence has better technology than you do, which to me means that we care more about looking after a case of tomatoes than we do about grandma. That's absolutely true. If that's provocative, great. Talk to me about it afterward. And I'll include you in yet another webinar that we're planning on information infrastructure within congregate care centers. So the other thing that we need for all of this is access to capital. So that's the equity and debt conversation, equity versus debt conversation. The current channels for capital investment in these properties are extremely limited. And that shows up in the fact that we've been putting the same color of lipstick on the same pig for decades now, and the result really isn't very different. Okay, so why don't we get what we need? Why don't we get progressive change in the long-term care sector? Why do we have the situation that we're in? Well, first of all, we don't have access to capital. We need a new, the program, the federal program that allowed the proliferation of hospitals and nursing homes in the 60s and 70s. We could do that again. And that would provide access to capital for developers to rehab, really renovate existing structures and create new ones. Does anybody really understand what the certificate of need programs were for in the first place? In many places, they have long outlived their usefulness, and there are other barriers to entry as well. We've been too busy eating each other's lunch. So you guys compete with one another, you compete with the nursing centers, you compete with the residential care home, you compete with everybody. That's dumb. Competition's good, But there must be a more rational approach to educating consumers about what they need and what they might want, so that we can learn what they might want, and so that they can have a chance of getting it. This eating each other's lunch extends so deeply into our culture. Perhaps that too is a bit too provocative, but I'd be happy to take questions about that going forward. I've participated in a number of recent collaboratives spawned by the CARES Act, which have demonstrated clearly that when providers get together, they can figure out how to collaborate very effectively. The other reason we don't get what we need in these sectors is that we're focused on profit, not the future. We're focused on near-termism rather than on the long view. We're focused on tactics rather than strategy. And frankly, it has paid so far to confuse the consumer. For many years, my firm conducted survey research for Philips Lifeline about long-term care and about the implementation of personal emergency response systems in the marketplace. And one of the things that we did routinely was to ask consumers about their attitudes towards these different components of the long-term care sector. And what this has absolutely proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to me, as well as the frequent phone calls I get from friends, relatives, and friends of relatives about their options in long-term care, is that the consumer doesn't understand the options available to her in long-term care. They don't understand how to access it. They don't understand the language, and we're partly responsible for that. Finally, providers don't collaborate. I know we have organizations, we have Leading Age, and we have Argentum, and we've got all these organizations, but they're not really collaborating. They are working at cross purposes very often. They came very close during the height of the pandemic in issuing some collaborative statements, but they were really paper thin. It was a veneer. So the providers don't get together, their associations don't get together, so we lose whatever impact. In the $2.8 trillion, maybe it's $3.2 trillion healthcare system in the United States, we are the proverbial pimple on the duck's butt. If we're going to have an impact, we need to create a stronger, more powerful narrative that gets at the issues that have been neglected so far. So I'm going to switch now from the building structures, those physical structures, the bones, the skeleton of the main character in the narrative, and talk about the software, talk about the programs, talk about the programmatic systems. And similar to what I was talking about, this is just a nightmare of unnecessarily complex, confusing doublespeak. What we have is we have programs that pit location, where you are, against what you may need. Programs that pit coverage, iSNPs, PACE versus what you need, SNF, nursing care, and pits community against home-based, congregate against community, nursing against home-based. This is crazy. It's an absolute rat's nest of complicated programs, coverages, requirements, assessments, and consumers are daunted by this chaos. How did it get this complicated? Quite simply, it got this complicated. You may want to mute everybody's mic.
Yeah, I'm going to mute everybody.
So how did it get this complicated? Well, first of all, it got this complicated because the regulators who were responsible for making sure that the federal or state or municipal money that was spent was protected. So these silos were created that prevented the pharmacy from collaborating with the home care agency, and prevented the home care agency from collaborating with the skilled nursing, and prevented the skilled nursing from collaborating with the hospital. One of the most daunting pieces of legislation, the The Stark regulations, the Medicare, Medicaid, anti-fraud and abuse legislation, is a bugaboo. It's waved like a sword of Damocles over everybody. Said, "Oh, we can't do that. That's Stark." Well, and that frightens everybody into running away. Well, that's baloney. There are ways to collaborate and cooperate, and it got this complicated because we were all at the effect of a well-intentioned effort to protect taxpayers' money, and that effort has gone berserk. So consumers don't know, and if consumers don't know, and they don't, why aren't we teaching them? Well, it's high time we stopped confusing them and high time we started educating them. So what do we need? We need screening and triage. We need a quasi-independent organization that sits in front of our long-term care system that provides objective, evidence-based criteria for who gets what, based on their need, not based on what kind of coverage they have or whether they happen to take a shower that morning. It's not a beauty contest. What do they need? Second, we should fit the person to the program, not the payment. I'm working with providers in several marketplaces, densely populated marketplaces now, and there are consumers who slip through the cracks, even though there are things like home care, Meals on Wheels, Medicaid programs, home and community-based programs. There are consumers who slip through the cracks. And why? Because we don't go looking for them, and they don't think to look up and say, "What about me?" So it's an incredibly embarrassing and expensive outcome to a cobbled together system. And finally, we need clear choices. The programs that are available to consumers, which they can access, should be laid out to them just crystal clear. Credit default swaps are simpler than long-term care choices. And if you've not seen the movie The Big Short, I commend it to you. Anyhow, technology and information. Here's another thing. The status of technology in our sector is embarrassingly bad. I know you've got kiosks on the walls that the caregivers walk up to and enter information into, and allegedly that becomes something that your vendor calls an electronic health record. Well, most of them are not really electronic health records. Most of them are just software systems that aggregate basics of information. Why don't all of these systems talk to each other? Try to find a system that has bona fide interoperability between all the databases in your marketplace area. If you find it, let me know. I've been looking, I have not found it, and I would challenge anybody to find it. The systems we have in place are focused on reporting, recording, and regulation compliance. They're not focused on information gathering and improving the quality of life of the end user. No, they have no real impact on staff efficiency. Who can afford this stuff? Certainly not skilled nursing centers. And with the way occupancy and utilization has gone in other market rate congregate care like assisted living and independent living, those owners and operators aren't going to spring for expensive systems. So my conclusion is that Kroger's or the Stop and Shop has more and better technology than you do. And I stand by that. I understand that that might be provocative, but it's true. If you walk into a Class A hotel anywhere in the world today, the individuals providing room service to that hotel have better technology than you do. If you walk into any retail or consumer-facing operation in the United States or anywhere in an OECD country, or even in an emerging market country, they have better technology than we do. Why? Because we were left behind, and our advocacy groups didn't step up and say, hey, wait a minute, you're not going to sign this bill, you're not going to sign this meaningful use legislation without including long-term care. But instead, what we got is explicitly eliminated from meaningful use. Okay, so that's a little bit of a rant, forgive me. So in technology, what do we need? We need personal emergency response system. No, we don't need we need an internet of long-term care. We need real electronic health records that tie the individual, regardless of her venue of care, together so that everybody has qualified, credentialed access to the information that we need. We need interoperability. And the key word here is ambient assisted living. If you've not heard it before, I commend it to you. It's the technology that sits around that shows us when the lights go on, when the lights need to go on, when the lights need to go off. That technology is readily available. It's inexpensive. It can be easily and efficiently deployed to the benefit of everybody. Okay, and this is just a humble pitch. I have a patent. My business has a patent called the Congregate Care Activity Tracker. It takes advantage of all these legacy technologies, which is why I know it works. Because if we did it, and I'm no techno wizard, believe me, if we did it, you guys can do it. Okay, people, this is getting an enormous amount of attention right now, and the importance of this issue cannot be overemphasized. This is not a crisis. This is a disaster, and it's a slow motion disaster. So who cares for persons of age, disability, and vulnerability? There's non-paid, which is the non-paid workforce of family caregivers, and paid professional. Who wants to work in the sector? Nobody wants to work in the sector. I know you say, oh, we found people, and that's great. When we do our survey research that's thorough, rigorous, we see that the vast majority of people, when surveyed, look down at working in long-term care. There's some exception that seems to be generational, and that's hopeful, but an enormous proportion of the working age cohort don't want to work in long-term care. So we need to look at what the sources are today and what the sources are tomorrow. Here is the breakdown. This is the data. This was from 2018 Kaiser Family Foundation. I don't want to linger on this too much. You can pore over this if you want when you get the slide deck. Here's the status quo right now. Here's what's going on right now. Here's the change in employment since February 2020 because of the pandemic. Look at the rate of employment in nursing and residential care facilities. And this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is our government's data. What do you think of that? I think that's disastrous. I think this is exactly the nightmare that we're headed toward. One of the reasons that we're headed there is because of the way we have funded the sector. I'm not talking about capital investment, as I was talking about before. I'm talking about payments in the sector. Nursing residential care employees are paid so poorly that, of course, if it comes down to taking care of my family properly or working in a assisted living residence where my heart is, I'm going to default some significant portion of the time to that extra 10 bucks an hour or 12 bucks an hour that I can get. These are issues that absolutely need to get resolved. And we see some evidence of the state of this calamity in the sign-on bonus activity that we see. Hospitals offering enormous sign-on bonuses for certain categories of paid professionals, which is what I like to call a race to the bottom. Because if they'll hop for you, they'll hop for me. Okay, so who wants to work? There's really, there's a generational hope that we can indeed find numbers in the younger cohorts who will want to work in long-term care. So I believe, I'm hopeful that in a generation we can remove the stigma, maybe a generation and a half. There's a big difference between why staff stay, why they leave and why they take the jobs in the first place. We're not looking at that as an industry. Why aren't our associations conducting leading edge research about why this is occurring? We need a federal long-term care jobs act. We need a jobs act in long-term care, and we needed it yesterday. We can no longer dilly-dally or say, oh my, what a problem. What's for lunch, Harry? This is a calamity coming right down at us. We need to retrain. There's about 8.5 million people who are unemployed right now in the United States. We can retrain them after they've been screened for certain personality characteristics, not only the criminal background check, but also screening for certain personality characteristics. And we have a system in place in the United States. We have federally funded jobs training centers where we could do this. We could use them. We need subsidies and benefits for ALICE. As you're going to hear this is the new acronym for asset limited, income constrained, but employed. We know who these people are. These are the people who are living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. They're mostly women. They're mostly women of color, and they're mostly single mothers. They need to be recruited, they need to be supported, and they need to be nurtured. We also need, many of you see this is the issue with age. Some of you may remember the H-1A visa program, which was a visa category expressly for nurses. It was enormously successful, bringing nurses into the United States. It was so successful, the nursing profession got up on its heels and said, stop, no more. Well, that should come back, and it should be adapted to the new requirements for frontline caregivers so that individuals who have some predetermined education, training, or experience in caring categories get favorable review, expedited consideration. Okay, culture. Culture in congregate care can be beautiful, it can be wonderful. I'm sure the culture in Deb's center that she was describing is nothing short of amazing. Unfortunately, they are the exception. A lot of the culture in long-term care is grim, partly because of the pandemic and partly because of the physical structures that individuals are working in. That too needs to get addressed. Finally, well, not finally, but next to last, outcome. Which is unfortunate, which is anecdotal recording of perceived satisfaction, and that's unfortunate. We need a more systematic way to measure satisfaction with the experience that we offer as part of our long-term care operations. And I'll repeat the question. If consumers don't know what they want, why aren't we teaching them? Okay, so finally to the economics. The direct and indirect costs of providing long-term care in the United States pale in comparison to the overall costs associated with the healthcare system. That means that the system has been shortchanged for 50 years. It's going to be very hard to change it, quickly. It's very clear. Medicaid directors at the state and federal level have told me personally that don't look at Medicaid as a way to get out of the problems in long-term care. They cannot afford the cost burden of long-term care without major structural reform, for which there is precious little political will at this time. Medicare backed out of this market 45 years ago. They didn't want to have anything to do with it because it saw the demographics and said, we can't afford this. We don't want to risk the trust fund assets on this, so they backed out. Many consumers believe erroneously that the government will pay for long-term care. This is a myth that's still afoot. And again, you can see why it would be against the perceived best interests of the long-term care sector to disabuse consumers of this myth. But I'm suggesting that it's far more damaging not to. It's more damaging to have someone get to the point where they need services and realize that they can't access anything except that which they cannot afford. And that's been a recipe for disappointment and disaster across the United States. The non-paid family care that's offered has been estimated reasonably at between 400 to 800 billion. I picked 500 billion as a sort of a medium reasonable estimate. There's waste, maldistribution, and lack of collaboration, and extraordinary and no longer unnecessary. It's just unnecessary fragmentation in the markets. So here's some ideas about what we should do to get what we need. First of all, this is in the economic domain. So speaking strategically, first, we need federal long-term care insurance. We are the only OECD country that doesn't have, the only developed economy that doesn't have a federally subsidized long-term care insurance program for its population. The only one. Now, up until about 11 years ago, there were two countries, us and Japan. Now, those of you who know should understand that Japan's demographics are way worse than ours. If you want to see what's coming down the pike for the United States demographically, look at what's going on in Japan. Well, if Japan introduced long-term care insurance 11 years ago, and it hasn't broken the bank and the system is working, we could do it here. There's really no reason except there's no political will. As always, it's been introduced by some counts 11 times, the idea of federally funded long-term care insurance. It's always the bridesmaid, never the bride. It's never been successful. And by the way, I want to differentiate a very, very bright line between private long-term care insurance and federally funded, publicly available long-term care insurance. They are profoundly different. Funding, that is to say, payment. How are we going to pay for this? Well, first of all, I would suggest a very small increase in Medicare payroll deduction, very small, a fraction of a percent. And in addition to that increase in the Medicare payroll deduction, which I know is a political non-starter, but I got to put it in there, a small premium with means testing, so a progressive premium on Medicare Parts A, which is the basic Medicare, Part C, which is the Medicare Advantage, and Part D, which is the big wet kiss that George Bush gave to the pharmaceutical industry over a decade ago. So a small cut of those premiums, small surcharge on those premiums would absolutely give us all the money that we need on a progressive basis to fund the changes that I've proposed. Private long-term care insurance is already fully deductible, but a lot of people don't know that. That ought to be made more clear so that if you want private long-term care insurance, you can get private long-term care insurance. And there should probably also be, as part of the federal insurance program, federal long-term care insurance program, an oversight board of the private long-term care insurance segment to prevent them from going out of business, to help them with their actuarial models and to guide them in developing premium models and sales structures. There should be a long-term care risk pool associated with the federal program in each state, very similar to the program that we have with the Affordable Care Act, and that we require all of the insurance companies, the Aetnas and the Uniteds, and all of them that are going to participate in this market, we require them to spend 0.5% of their premiums educating and communicating about long-term care programs. That's how consumers will get educated about when to access, what to access, and who to call. So some people say, well, how are we going to afford all of this? Well, I put this slide together before it was looking like we were going to spend trillions and trillions of dollars putting programs together through the political. John Maynard Keynes, arguably the most important economist in this century, said, assuredly we can afford this and much more. Anything we can actually do, we can afford. If we had the political will, if this disaster were truly a wake-up call, we would find a way to get all of this done. And that's the end of the presentation.
The world is cannot be changed without them. Very good. Very good. All right. I can only imagine, Irving, that there are going to be some questions. I know there will be. So let's start off. Who would like to ask the first question or challenge the first question or challenge Irving with their first question? Maybe we can go back to the gallery view and then it'll
Sure.
be easier. Okay, thoughts? There has to be some questions.
I have a
Here we
question.
go.
So you were talking about I'm sorry, I wish I formulated it before I turned on my camera. You were talking about your system, like the lights going on automatically and whatnot, and that, like, how do you balance the automation, the technology with the privacy issues? You know, like a lot of elders, they don't trust technology, they don't like it, and so it's hard for us to kind of sell those things.
Yes, that's a very good question, Natasha. And the research, when we ask elders about their trust of technology, when we ask them directly, there's always resistance, or at least historically there's been resistance, especially in the 75 to 84, it builds up, and 85 plus, it's definitely there. However, when you put someone into a room and the lights come on, they don't challenge that. And I'm not suggesting that we should be deceptive. I'm saying we should bake into our structures the same level of technology, because it shows that we care, that we bake into our grocery stores and our hotels. That's what I mean by that Internet of long-term care. And if you Google and do a little scratching around on this concept called ambient assisted living, it is just as it suggests. It means that there are sensors and there are devices in the environment that offer information that can be aggregated, which don't represent, it's not a video camera taking a picture of you. It offers information, and when presented that way, and I don't know of any large-scale survey that's presented that way, but I'm confident that it would be accepted. Hi, Linda, you're on. Your mic is on, Linda.
I just turned it off. But if you want to ask a question, turn it right back on, Linda.
Yeah, come on, bring it. I didn't say anything that shocked you. Come on.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, is anybody thinking about this and doing anything about this other than you?
There are, yes, there are some hopeful signs of voices in the wilderness. In our neck of the woods, there's a fellow by the name of Dave Grabowski, who's pretty well known, and he's very well accepted on Capitol Hill. So he spends a fair amount of time on Capitol Hill. He understands these concepts very well. And though he doesn't necessarily agree with everything I put forward here today, he wouldn't disagree, because I've talked to him about it, he wouldn't disagree with any of it. And there are initiatives funded through CARES Act and other sources that are carrying some of the programmatic collaborative initiatives forward. So we were successful getting, for example, getting a CARES Act grant for a provider in Rhode Island. And we're moving ahead with creating a really distinctive collaborative model in East Providence, Rhode Island. There's a guy I work with in California who's doing something very similar in the San Diego area. What we really need is we really need some of these initiatives in areas of high urban density where we know there's urban inequality, where we know that there's populations who are, I'll just speak strategically and then I'll layer on the cultural bias, who are costing the system disproportionately and who represent underrepresented or disenfranchised populations, the homeless, the indigent, women of color and age, and the disabled. So we know who they are, and the fact that we haven't gone after them and built systems around them is yet more example of the lack of political will. So yes, there are some initiatives. At this stage in my career, I remain guardedly optimistic, I'll say. Thanks, good question, Eve, thank you.
Michelle.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. So I have a question regarding the federal stimulus money that's about to hit states. And Massachusetts is getting 8 billion with the B to Massachusetts, that the predominant goal is infrastructure. I happen to sit on a school board, so I know, from that world that there's a lot of lobbying going on from different sectors as to how to use that money. But there's also federal money, that's not necessarily targeted to specific states there's a big fight in Washington about, how to spend that money right now for infrastructure. And to me, this is in line with those goals. So are there any movements on the national level? I mean, are legislators talking about this federally, about beefing up or, making a Hill-Burton Act, a 2.0, so to speak?
So for the Hill-Burton Act in particular, I don't believe anyone's talking about it. With regards to long-term care, yes, there's a lot of conversation about it. And most of it focused on HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services, which is frankly, the flavor of the month club, because it doesn't address the bona fide need. The bona fide need is at the rotten infrastructure of long-term care, which is a skilled nursing center. And I'm sorry if those of you working in skilled nursing, but that's what it is. It's rotten. I've been in about 3,000 nursing homes out of the 15,000 in the United States. And I can tell you, you got it good in Massachusetts, because the rest, it's terrible. And that's not going to address it. And the image that I use in my head, which has been the case for federal and less so state, but more so federal programs now for decades, because I've been around that long, is it's like a tapeworm. The tapeworm moves, it gets the best stuff first. And whoever's there with the biggest lobbying dollars and the biggest voice, they get the good stuff. And everybody else gets what's left. And unfortunately, long-term care has gotten what's left. And we know what that resulted in. 30% of the deaths in the United States occurred in congregate care centers. We can't go on having 2 beds per room, sometimes 3 beds per room, 4 beds per room. Well, how are we going to change that when the Medicaid regulations expressly state in, 30 of the 50 states that it won't pay for a private room, right? So these are issues, these are structural issues. So I believe that our organized representatives, the representatives of our sector, need to be, frankly, raising hell. The narrative to this epilogue is tragic to the nth degree, and yet it's going quietly away. And that, to me, that's a national, it's organized irresponsibility, in my opinion.
And that's why you're here. We want to hear your opinion. Great question, Michelle. Any others?
Yeah, I have a question. So many of the slides had a comment to them, kind of backing a little bit what Michelle was saying with regards to relying on political will and the fact that there is a lack of that. How do we turn that tide?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. And I would suggest that we turn that tide with a political narrative that's irrefutable and unstoppable. And the political narrative needs to be public rhetoric, public messages that we as a sector are frankly embarrassed to carry, but because of our obligation to those we serve, we find it necessary to carry. And we carry it right to the doorsteps of our congresspersons, our senators, our governors, and we say, you know, yeah. This stuff that you're dealing with is nice. Here are 1,400 dead people in your state. What are you going to do about it? The only way I know to really move politicians, and I served as a representative in Washington, D.C. for some time, the only way I know to move politicians is to either pay them or embarrass them. And since we can't pay them because our lobby isn't big enough, I say, go for the embarrassment. Did I answer your question, Linda?
Well, you did. I still want, I'm just thinking that this is a sector that, you know, employs people that deeply care, and that's why they're working in such conditions and putting things to that. And it's been a long time since I've kind of worked in that area, and parts of me really miss it. Parts of me would only want to step back into it if I felt like I could be really making a needle moving difference. And part of it's because the idea is really exhausting. And so I believe that a lot of people working in this sector are exhausted, you know, and so trying that added on thing to work on embarrassing our politicians, I'm all for it. but I don't know. I feel defeated without even really having my feet in it at the moment.
And that's completely understandable, Linda. Yet we have this crisis. This is an epilogue to the crisis. We are at a juncture where virtually everyone's burned out.
Yep.
We're at a juncture where virtually everyone has taken shifts and work and assignment and tasks that they didn't think they'd ever have to do, and yet they're doing it. This is a time when everyone is still wondering if they can travel over the holidays safely. This is bizarro land, but here we are.
Can I raise a
All right,
question?
yeah. Why don't we do one more question? It's 5:28. So Nancy, you got it.
Okay, could you address the issue of immigration and staffing? Because many people who work in a lot of the facilities are immigrants who have come here. They're not, citizens yet. Many don't even have green cards. And all that's going on about immigration in this country, I think, has a big effect on a lot of this too.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that and the lack of attention, the lack of support that the professional associations have offered I have to say it the way it is, to the underclass of direct caregivers in our sector, they should be embarrassed. I've been to dozens of meetings and dozens of conferences, and I can count on one hand the number of times that either the association or the provider has sponsored a direct caregiver to go to the conference to participate or receive an award or some kind of recognition. Well, that's nuts. If you want to attract people to work in a sector where you're dealing with people who are not compos mentis or people who require bathing and diaper changes, if you want people to work in that sector, you have to honor them. The mayor should go to their graduation and hand them the diploma. So
But-
instead,
But I also meant if we are limiting immigration,
oh yeah,
we'll never fill these positions because these positions have, over all the years I've been in it, which is a long time, some of you know,
yes,
it's filled a great deal by those people just coming to this country.
yes. I couldn't agree with you more, Nancy. And Ai Weiwei did a wonderful movie back in 2016 called Migration. And he talks about the movement, the migrations. We're living in a time when migrations have been enormous across borders, economic, trauma, war. And historically, the United States has taken a significant portion of those migrants. My grandparents came to the United States as a result of famines in Ireland. So why we can't do that now just is mind-boggling. And as I said in the presentation, there's precedence for this. The United States Immigration Naturalization Service had a visa category for about a decade called the H-1A program, specifically targeting nurses, and it resulted in roughly 20,000 nurses coming into the United States. Well, couldn't we use those nurses now?
I meant even like home health aides at
Yes.
CS are all these people.
Yes, exactly. And it would be relatively easy to modify the standards or the criteria of the H-1A program, a revised H-1A program, to include individuals who met all of the good criteria, but who were more suited to direct care jobs that weren't, paid professional nurses, but were caregivers, or as they say in the UK, carers. I like that word, carers. Well, thank you all very much. I hope, if nothing else, it stirred some interest in the subject, in these subjects. I'll look forward to being in touch with you. If you want to sign up I'll be sending an email. I think we'll get your email addresses, and if you want to sign up, sign up. If you don't, you don't have to. And thank you again, Bob, for organizing this, and thank you all for staying on the line.
Irving, if you can send me the deck for this PowerPoint, what I'll do is I'll send that along with the email for, the two links.
Good.
So you have everything at the same time.
Okay.
Great.
All right, expect that tomorrow at some point. And it's great seeing everybody. It really is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Irving.
you.
I'll be in touch. Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
See you, Michelle.
See you, Linda.
I feel bad ending the meeting because people are still like smiling and. I
It
don't
was
know if
very
I'm
good.
or not. Mhm.
Very good.
I told you, he's thought provoking. Hopefully, maybe even the next, sometime the beginning of next year when he said he was working on that other one as well.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get that too. Eve, did you enjoy it? Did he answer your question all right?
Yeah, I loved it. And thank you so much. And, I want to ask him all these questions about London, where I suspect he is at this moment.
Oh, you thought he was at London?
I'm just guessing because he has something going on between United States and the UK. He's mentioned that.
Mhm.
He mentioned that thing at the end, how they call them carers. And when he was talking about the time, he said, oh, I thought it began at 9:30. I mean 4:30.
Ah,
And
good.
my daughter lives there,
Very
so I'm very
observant.
conscious. Well, my daughter's there, so I'm really conscious of the time difference. And he'll be getting an email from me. It's like, how can I go work there at some point? So,
Very perceptive of you.
ah,
Ah,
my UK antenna. Anyway, thank you very much.
All right.
That was great.
okay, great. You're welcome.
Very
All right.
good.
Bye.
signing off, Deb.
Bob, we'll
talk-
talk.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.